They mocked her as a granny rookie. Then she took on 5 officers and won. "Are you sure you're in the right place, ma'am?" The voice cut through the early morning desert chill like a bullet. Talia Tal Reyes paused on the cracked asphalt of Fort Drain's intake point, her boot heels clicking softly against the sun-baked ground. She glanced over at Private Jenkins, a burly 20-something with a smirk already forming. Gray streaks threaded through Tal's dark braid, and fine lines etched around her eyes, evidence of 20 years patrolling the border before she'd volunteered for this pipeline. Jenkins and his peers saw those marks and called them weakness. They didn't know what real fatigue looked like. Tal adjusted the old trident pendant against her sternum, the dull metal cool against her uniform. It had been her mother's, a symbol of lineage of fierce guardians standing watch in impossible conditions. Today it was a challenge flag she had raised in silence. The transport bus disgorged a handful of dozen candidates, all half Tal's age, slim and taut faces bright with ambition. They clustered around the administrative building as though it were a stage, and they the stars. Tal carried only one duffel bag, the canvas worn to a pale khaki, her posture relaxed but purposeful. She ignored the sideways glances, the low snickers about political placements and baggage claim rejects. Each whisper bounced off her reserve-building layers of patience, where others saw complacency. Colonel Madison Carter's office stood at the building's heart glass, reflecting the searing sun. Inside the colonel, a fierce, composed black woman scrolled through Tal's file on a tablet. It showed nothing but basic training from 2 decades ago, and a single-line specialist candidate experience classified. Carter tapped her stylus. "Talia Reyes," she said, voice firm, yet curious. "Your record is sparse. Explain." Tal's storm-gray eyes met Carter's. "I've done my duty where it mattered, ma'am. I'm here to meet your standard. Simple, direct, no apologies." Carter studied the trident pendant, noticing the thin red thread wrapped around its shaft like a lifeline. "See Sergeant Jackson Thorne at Combat Hall. He's your instructor. Don't give him any reason to doubt you. The colonel's warning was unspoken but clear. You're an experiment. Pass or you'll be broken." Combat Hall was a cavernous warehouse, filled with mats, heavy bags, and the scent of sweat and rubber. Sergeant Jax Thorne, a mountain of a man carved from old-school aggression-sized Tal, up with a slow, scornful gaze. Well, he boomed, letting the echo hang. They let Grandma play soldier. Now Tal's blend of Latina heritage and salt and pepper hair had called down direct challenge. She didn't blink. She simply unshouldered her duffel, revealing the sleek prototype rifle Jax had confiscated during intake. Its handguard bore a small red thread inlay, her mother's final gift, stitched into the wood. Tal lifted the weapon with reverence. "Ready when you are, Sergeant." His smirk faltered for an instant, then he barked orders to the group. Tal followed every command with quiet precision, her inner calm, a contrast to the cadets' frantic moves. Outside, PFC Isaac Calloway, one of the few who'd offered her a nod of respect, watched her form. He'd grown up on a farm. He recognized discipline when he saw it. Tal's movements were not those of a rookie. They were roots entrenched in years of survival, yet no one else would see until she had to prove it on the obstacle course. Thorne yelled, "Obstacle 1 mile, go." Youthful racers surged forward. Tal exhaled 4-count style fill settle hold press, then took off at a steady metronome pace. The sprinters gasped and wheezed while Tal passed them mile by mile stride, unbroken heart, unshaken. As the younger men stumbled, Tal's trident glinted in the sun, each step echoing her mother's creed. Strength is born of endurance. Jenkins' laughter drained away as she crossed the finish line, calm and unruffled. A hush fell. She wiped her brow, rewrapped the pendant's red thread, and met Thorne's gaze. His skepticism had no purchase now. The pipeline's first test was done, and the real trial was only beginning. "Your file says nothing about you. What's your story?" Specialist Reyes Colonel Madison Carter's voice was calm, but carried the weight of every unsaid expectation in that room. Talia Tal Reyes stood at parade rest, her back straight, despite the accusation. The air in the administrative office felt thin, as if every breath were under inspection. Tal reached up and touched the trident pendant at her throat, feeling the frayed, red thread her mother's final lesson woven into its metal endurance. "Ma'am, my history isn't in the file," she replied, voice steady. "But I'm here to prove why it should be." Carter studied Tal's unflinching gaze, the way her storm-gray eyes held both challenge and respect. Around them, a half-dozen junior officers leaned against the wall, arms folded in judgment. Tal sensed their disbelief, ageism, sexism, prejudice mixing into a silent chorus. She doesn't belong. Yet she didn't back down. "I served 20 years in Border Patrol," she continued, in sectors where every decision meant life or death. "I'm not here for a refresher. I'm here to exceed your standards." The colonel tapped her stylus. On the tablet, Tal's service record flashed briefly before fading to classified operations. Carter's lips tightened. She'd seen plenty of veterans, but never one with history buried so deep. "Your next stop is Combat Hall Carter," said voice, clipped. "Sergeant Jackson Jax Thorne is your lead. Don't be the problem he writes home about." Tal nodded and exited into the blistering desert sun, the trident swinging against her chest. Combat Hall rose like a fortress of steel and sweat. Inside, the echo of heavy bag strikes met her ears. Jax Thorne stood by a line of recruits, bark echoing across mats. He was every stereotype of military toughness, broad shoulders, shaved head, a glare that dared anyone to challenge him. Tal stepped forward, trying to make herself small in a room built for aggression. "Specialist Reyes reporting as ordered," she said. Thorne turned, eyes narrowing. He took in the gray streaks, the pendant, the folded duffel at her feet. "They assign us politicians now," he sneered, voice booming. "Think you can handle real pain?" Grandma laughter rippled through the younger soldiers. Thorne's contemptuous glare invited a reaction, but Tal stayed silent, waiting. Thorne barked today's module close quarters combat. "No weapons. Just your body versus his. Show me you're not a liability." His words were a trap. Remove her rifle, strip away the symbol of legacy force, her to rely on raw skill. Tal's heart beat faster. Without the rifle, the trident pendant would be her only talisman, a reminder of her mother's guerrilla tactics leverage over brute force. She squared her shoulders, stepping onto the mat. The first opponent charged like a bull, jostling recruits around them. Twist logic, what looked like a punishment would become proof of principle. Tal channeled every patrol technique, off-balance footwork, redirecting momentum, and deflected the attack with a single pivot and wrist lock that sent him sprawling. A hush fell. Thorne's brow furrowed. He barked. Next, Tal's mind focused on the pendant's red thread, a constant pulse of courage. Each technique she deployed was economical, no wasted motion, only precision. As recruits watched in stunned silence, Tal executed joint locks and throws that used leverage rather than strength. Time slowed. Her movements were a conversation with physics, not a clash of muscle. Thorne's scoff turned to grudging respect. But there was no time to bask. He called out obstacle course next. "Let's see if you can run from your problems." Tal breathed deeply, feeling the desert heat fill her lungs. She nodded, stepping off the mat. The real race was about to begin. "Did you just see that she's already halfway through the course?" The shout came from the bleachers, and every head turned toward the winding obstacle trail as Talia Tal Reyes flew past a line of sprinting cadets like a desert gust. The sun climbed higher over Fort Drain's training grounds, turning the air into a furnace, but Tal ran as if she were carved from the very rock beneath her feet, the red thread embroidered in her trident pendant glowing faintly against her chest. Private Jenkins, panting at the rear of the pack, shook his head. "How is she not dead yet?" Tal's face was set in calm determination. She ignored the snickers about her age and heritage, tuning instead to the rhythm of her breath, inhale, exhale, steadiness, and to the steady pulse of the red thread at her throat, a constant reminder of her mother's creed: endurance under all conditions. The first mile was a blur of sandbags, low walls, and tangled ropes, but Tal moved through them with surgical precision. Where younger cadets leaped and stumbled, she slipped under wires, vaulted barriers, and vaulted back to her feet without wasting an ounce of energy. A twisted wire snagged Private Calloway's sleeve and sent him sprawling. Tal paused for a heartbeat to stabilize her footing, then tapped his shoulder and flicked a thumb forward, a silent encouragement to keep moving. Calloway wiped the dust from his palms, eyes wide, and surged back into the chase. Yet even he couldn't match her metronomic pace. By mile 2, the sprinter's bright starts had faded into ragged gasps. Tal's trident pendant swung with the motion of her stride, the metal reflecting the sun in flashes that looked almost like sparks. One critical obstacle loomed ahead, the fireman's pole, a test of upper body strength. While the sprinters struggled to hoist themselves, Tal looped the red thread around her glove, gripped the pole, and ascended in a smooth, efficient climb. At the top, she paused to catch her breath, scanning the horizon, a trick her mother had taught her to anticipate every element. Then she slid down the pole landing light, and sure, continuing the trail without hesitation. The final mile twisted through a muddy trench and a mirrored maze of mirrors set at angles to test spatial awareness. Tal slowed just enough to keep from slipping and used her peripheral vision to map the turns. She emerged from the mud-covered head to toe, but unbroken in focus. Overhead, the cadets' huffs and wheezes turned to stunned silence. Sergeant Jax Thorne watched from the finish line, arms folded, jaw clenched. He muttered, "That pendant's worth more than their whole platoon." Tal crossed the finish line in just under 20 minutes, a time that would have netted top marks in the record books if she had been competing officially. Instead, she simply unwrapped the red thread from her glove, tidied her uniform, and walked past the gathering crowd. Each face she passed was etched with disbelief, the young officers who had doubted her, the lieutenants who had sneered, even Colonel Carter, who scribbled notes on her tablet. Tal's silence spoke louder than any protest. Behind the finish line, Calloway jogged up beside her, panting but smiling. "You just rewrote the rulebook, specialist." Tal offered him a tired grin. "I'm just hitting my stride." She patted the trident at her throat and added, "Next up, combat hall. 0 weapons, all pressure. Let's see if they can break my pace with pain." As Cadet Thorne barked orders to line up for the next module, close quarters combat, Tal felt the familiar thrill of challenge pulse through her veins. The obstacle course had tested her body, but the real test would be mind and spirit. She adjusted her stance in the dirt, the trident's red thread warm against her breastbone, and squared her shoulders. The air crackled with anticipation. And in that moment, Tal knew the next battlefield would not just prove her endurance, it would prove her invincibility. "Drop the weapon. Grandma, let's see how you fight barehanded." Lieutenant Ethan Ration's taunt cut through the gym's roar, echoing against the mats like a slap. Talia Tal Reyes stood in the center circle, hands at her sides, the trident pendant tucked beneath her shirt, but its red thread pulsing like a heartbeat through her chest. She inhaled, feeling the dust and sweat of Fort Drain's combat hall settle in her lungs. Sergeant Jax Thorne's voice boomed, "No gear, no excuses. No, show me you're not a liability." Tal's gaze flicked to the glossy floor, then back to Thorne's towering frame. This was the real test. No rifle, no leverage. Just her and 5 opponents who believed her age, her gender, her unspoken past would break under pressure. The first officer, a wiry private with more bravado than sense, charged like a bull. Tal's muscles tensed, and she felt the pendant's thread glow warm against her sternum, as if her mother whispered, "Use your mind, not your might." She shifted her weight, pivoted on the ball of her foot, and met the charge with a palm strike to his sternum, turning his momentum into a graceful arc that sent him sprawling. The crowd gasped. Thorne's eyes narrowed. The twist of logic, what looked like yielding, became the strongest defense. Rancid leather mats squeaked under worn boots as the next 2 officers advanced in tandem, expecting a flurry of desperation. Tal stayed rooted, her center of gravity, a fortress. When one reached low for her legs, she bent like a reed, guiding his momentum into his partner's gut. They crashed into each other in a collision of arrogance, rolling in a tangle until they froze, stunned and winded. Tal's chest rose steadily, her inner calm, a stark contrast to their shredded confidence. Then Rashan himself stepped forward, fists clenched, rage radiating like heat. Tal met his lunge with a forearm block that felt softer than it looked, catching his strike on the braided red thread of her pendant. With a single motion, she twisted his arm behind him, the same technique her mother had taught her under starless skies on the border precision over power. Rashan grunted, face draining of color, as she applied controlled downward pressure to a nerve cluster. He crumpled, surrendering before he hit the mat. Only one remained, Lieutenant Davis, eyes wide, stepping back as though confronting a ghost. Tal's gaze softened. She offered her hand not to humiliate, but to honor the warrior's code. "I'm not your enemy," she said quietly. His fingers shook as he took her hand, and he nodded, tears of shame and awe in his eyes. The gym fell silent. Sergeant Thorne exhaled hard, his stoic mask cracking to reveal respect. In that charged stillness, Tal touched the trident beneath her shirt, feeling the red thread's pulse align with her own. The symbol of her mother's legacy had guided her once more, not as a weapon, but as a compass for honor and restraint. As the final whistle sounded and the fallen officers slowly rose, the crowd erupted into a stunned ovation. Tal bent to retrieve her duffel, every eye following her silent dignity. Yet behind the applause, she sensed the next challenge stirring a whispered conversation at the doorway, a file being updated, a higher-level test on the horizon. And the trident's thread throbbed in agreement. The greatest battle was still ahead. "Who gave her the right to rewrite our entire program?" Captain Elias Navarro's voice cut through the conference room like a knife. Seated around the long oak table, Fort Drain's senior staff shifted uncomfortably. At the head of the table, Colonel Madison Carter met Navarro's glare with calm steel. Standing beside Carter was Talia Tal Reyes, the 42-year-old specialist who'd just dismantled every conventional training metric. Tal steadied herself, feeling the familiar pulse of the trident pendant beneath her uniform, a symbol of legacy, endurance, and now change. Carter opened a tablet displaying live video clips of Tal's performance, the flawless obstacle run, the precise defensive pivots, the intimate leverage locks that had humbled 5 young officers in seconds. "This isn't just one specialist's success," Carter began, voice firm. "It's an indictment of a system that values age and pedigree over skill and discipline. Today we decide, do we reinforce outdated barriers, or do we build a pipeline that truly rewards merit, regardless of years, or rank?" Murmurs rippled around the room. Captain Navarro slammed his fist on the table. "You'd dismantled decades of tradition because one civilian beat rookies half her age. Ridiculous." Tal felt the tension. As more than discomfort, it was a challenge to every veteran who'd relied on hierarchy to define excellence. She inhaled her mother's lesson. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action despite it." She cleared her throat. "Respectfully, Captain, tradition has its place. But when it hides favoritism like unofficial quotas for legacy candidates, we're failing the mission. I'm here because my service record was buried, not because I begged for a chance." Dr. Emily Wong, Fort Drain's psychological operations advisor, leaned forward. "I've reviewed Tal's stress metrics, heart rate, cortisol levels, performance under duress. Her resilience is off the charts. We have younger soldiers breaking halfway through the obstacle course, yet she runs at a controlled pace. This suggests a model for screening that doesn't default to age, but to cognitive and emotional endurance." She tapped a chart showing comparative data. "We can pilot a new screening protocol, leverage biometric and psychometric assessments alongside physical tests." Colonel Carter nodded. "Proposal 1, eliminate the de facto legacy quota and open the first 10 slots of every cycle to open merit candidates with demonstrated skills regardless of age or background. Proposal 2, integrate psychological resilience metrics like Tal's into core evaluations. We'll start here, then roll out to Drago Station next quarter." She turned to Tal. "Specialist Reyes, will you lead the working group to refine these protocols?" Navarro's jaw clenched. He looked at Tal's unassuming posture and saw not weakness but unyielding conviction. The twist was clear. What was meant to punish Tal for her age had instead made her the catalyst for transformation. Tal felt the trident's red thread press warm against her heart, an ember of purpose ignited by systemic injustice. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'll assemble a team." As Carter dismissed the meeting, Tal caught Navarro's eye. He gave a stiff nod, an unspoken pact that he'd watch her progress closely. Walking down the corridor, Tal passed the clang of armor lockers and the hum of tactical planning. PFC Isaac Calloway fell in beside her, eyes bright. "You just changed the rules, Specialist." Tal smiled, the trident's thread seeming to glow brighter. "We changed the game. Next up, field trials. We'll see how far this momentum carries us." At the end of the hall, a bulletin board displayed new orders. "Open merit pilot candidate applications now accepted." Tal paused, tracing the bold letters with her finger. The threshold to opportunity had finally cracked open. Beyond that, the desert sun blazed against the steel walls, an unwritten horizon waiting for a new generation to run toward. And Tal Reyes' trident, held high, was ready to lead them into the breach. "Everyone's watching you now. Don't let them down, Specialist Reyes." The words rang through the makeshift training ground, like a warning. Talia Tal Reyes tightened her grip on the prototype Reyes model rifle, its handguard etched with a faint red thread that caught the morning sun. Today was the first open merit field trial, a showcase for the new protocols she'd helped design. The crowd gathered on the bleachers, family members, recruits, seasoned officers, even skeptical journalists, all there to see if a 42-year-old outsider could really lead a revolution in military training. Tal felt the weight of every doubt pressing against her chest, but she drew in a steady breath, letting the trident pendant at her throat warm her resolve. The trial began with a long-range sight alignment test at 200 meters. Young cadets rushed their shots in search of glory. Some hit high, some hit low, most missed the bullseye entirely. Tal settled into a supported prone chest against the red earth and closed her eyes for 4 counts in settle-hold squeeze. Her first round rang out precisely, and the steel gong sang true. Whispers rippled across the stands. "She's not just a veteran, she's a master." With each successive shot, Tal's group tightened into an inch-wide cluster that even hardened snipers envied. The twist logic was clear. What rookies learned in months, she demonstrated in minutes, proving that disciplined practice and emotional resilience mattered more than raw physicality. Next came the urban scenario drill. Candidates advanced on a mock village while under simulated fire. Tal moved like a ghost, the red thread in her pendant flickering through every doorway and window, an unspoken signal of her inherited instincts. She cleared corners with silent precision, communicated non-verbally with her spotter via subtle head tilts, and navigated the labyrinth of obstacles without ever breaking stride. The young recruits flinched at every bang and shout, while Tal's calm assurance steadied the team, guiding them through the chaos. Reporters scribbled notes about the combat grace she displayed, and officers exchanged glances. Perhaps they'd underestimated her prior military record. Finally, the endurance challenge, a 2-mile march with full gear, followed by a marksmanship test from improvised positions. Halfway through the march, the sun baked mercilessly, and the once pristine uniforms of the cadets were plastered with sweat. Tal slowed just enough to maintain breathing under control, glancing at her watch and adjusting her pace. The red thread on her rifle case brushed her hand, a reminder of her mother's creed. Endurance is the proof of purpose. At the firing line, she braced on a rusty barrel angle, awkward, yet still delivered 3 perfect shots before the cadets could even find their grips. The air buzzed with astonishment. The outsider had turned every trial into a lesson in disciplined mastery. As the judges tallied scores, Tal stood alone under the desert sky, her pulse finally slowing. The trident's red thread glowed faintly at her throat, a beacon of legacy and possibility. Colonel Carter approached clipboard in hand, eyes shining with pride. "Outstanding," she said quietly, voice catching. "You've validated every change." Behind Carter, Lieutenant Ration, and Sergeant Thorne exchanged looks once opponents, now admirers. But even as applause broke out, Tal sensed the next battle looming: institutional inertia, budget pressures, and political backlashes that could swallow the new protocols whole. She squared her shoulders, chin lifted by the promise the trident offered. Today was victory. Tomorrow she'd have to defend that triumph. And in the desert's endless expanse, Tal Reyes knew the real test was just beginning. "Specialist Reyes, do you even realize what you've just unlocked?" The voice crackled through Tal's earpiece as she sat in the back of a blacked-out Humvee barreling down the dusty service road. Her pulse spiked. Ever since the open merit trials, she'd been on edge, expecting backlash from traditionalists. Now, as the vehicle rumbled toward an undisclosed location, the weight of every achievement pressed against her chest. She gripped the trident pendant at her throat, the red thread glowing faintly under her uniform, a beacon of endurance and lineage. Outside, the desert sun began its descent, painting long shadows across the barracks. Tal replayed the trials in her mind, the flawless marksmanship, the calm navigation of urban scenarios, the endurance march that left cadets but a distant echo, breathless behind her. Every test had proven one truth: merit transcends age, rank, and birthright. Yet the promise of systemic change hung in the balance. She inhaled mind, steadying on her mother's final lesson. Strength isn't granted, it's forged. The Humvee screeched to a halt in a hidden alcove flanked by nondescript shipping containers. Two shadowy figures emerged, ushering her into a warehouse interior lit by a single bulb. Walls were lined with gear racks and encrypted communications hubs, nothing like the standard combat hall. A lone figure stepped forward, wearing a subdued patch of a ghostly trident. Tal froze. The Spectres. The clandestine special operations unit she'd only heard whispered in stories were real. And they'd been watching. "Your protocol recommendations have been approved for field deployment," the figure said, voice modulated and calm. "But there's a bigger mission waiting. You've proven yourself beyond any pipeline. We need your expertise on operations that can't exist on paper." Tal's heart hammered. This was the moment she'd never expected: an invitation to join the hidden legacy that birthed her own resilience. The twist was profound. Her file hadn't been blank. It was buried. Classified not to erase her, but to protect her lineage as the daughter of a specter. She stepped forward, eyes meeting the operators. The trident pendant warmed at her throat, an echo of her grandmother's red thread stitch. Now she understood why the symbol was so sacred. It wasn't just heritage, it was an oath to justice when systems fail. "I'll do it," Tal said, voice low but unwavering. "But on one condition: the pipeline changes. We started open merit resilience screening. Those must continue." The operator nodded. "They will. Your work here is just as vital as what lies ahead." Behind them, a hatch lifted, revealing a helicopter's silhouette against the dusk sky. Tal felt the desert wind swirl around her, carrying the dust of old battles and the promise of new ones. The moral clash between hidden operations and transparent reform now converged in her hands. As she climbed aboard, the pendant's thread pulsed like a heartbeat. In that final moment before the rotor blades spun, Tal Reyes knew this mission would demand every ounce of endurance, cunning, and honor she possessed, and that her true legacy was only beginning. "Welcome back to a world that never believed you belonged here." The words echoed in Tal's mind as the helicopter's rotor wash died away, leaving only the desert twilight and the steady hum of auxiliary power. Talia Tal Reyes stepped onto the helipad of the secret compound, her uniform still bearing the dust of Recon Flight 7. In her palm, the trident pendant felt impossibly warm, an ember of legacy passed from mother to grandmother to her own indomitable spirit. Behind her, the Spectre operator who'd flown her in gestured toward the open doors. "This is where transparency meets necessity. Decide how you'll wield both." Inside, rows of screens displayed live feeds of Fort Drain's new training grounds, where the open merit pipeline launched its first fully integrated cohort. Faces of cadets from every background scrolled past: Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, White, all side by side, unified by skill. Tal's proposal, once dismissed as radical, now formed the backbone of the next generation's crucible. But on other screens, dark corners showed classified ops planning missions, where secrecy still reigned absolute. The twist logic she'd been right to challenge old barriers, yet the fight for fairness would always exist alongside missions that could never go public. A senior Spectre known only as Director Cross emerged from the shadows. Her silver hair framed a face weathered by hidden wars. "You've done more than break systems," Cross said, voice low. "You've forged a bridge between two worlds, the one we hide in darkness and the one we defend in daylight. Now we need you to lead both." Tal's heart thundered. The weight of impossible choices settled like armor. She looked at the screens showing her reforms and the world they stood to transform, and at the classified schematics mapping lives that must remain secret. Tal lifted the trident pendant, red thread catching the LED glow. It shimmered like a guiding star. "I never wanted secrecy for its own sake," Tal said. "I want justice, transparency, and readiness to protect those who can't protect themselves. If that means walking in shadows and in the light, then I accept." The moral conflict crystallized to safeguard liberty. Sometimes truths must stay hidden, and yet reform must burn brightest in the open. Director Cross nodded, sliding a matte black patch onto the table, the Spectre crest entwined with a laurel wreath, their new emblem of dual commitment. "Wear this when you need to stay unseen," Cross said. "And your trident when you stand in the sun. They're the two halves of your oath." Tal affixed the patch to her chest rig over the insignia of the Open Merit program. The dual symbols, Spectre crest and trident, felt like two hearts beating in unison. Behind her, the desert sky deepened to indigo. In that vast expanse, Tal could sense both the paths she'd reshaped and the unknown ahead. As she strode toward the hangar exit, the hum of the world beyond whispered of future trials, wars declared and undeclared, reforms under fire, secrets to protect and truths to reveal. Tal Reyes clipped the trident pendant into view, feeling its red thread pulse with purpose. She paused at the threshold, hand on the doorframe. "Time to show them both what justice looks like," she said. And with that she stepped into whatever dawn awaited her, ready to lead in both darkness and light.